Den är igång. Sen så ska jag göra det här. Ja,
Men vad händer på rasten och sådär?
knappsatsen vid sidan av där kan du trycka 15 minuter.
Okej.
Lycka till.
Tack. So, welcome. Hi. I will deliver the lectures on the project management part in this course, so you kind of understand what the process we're using for running these projects. So, today's lecture is kind of an introduction to project management. We're going to talk essentially only about traditional project management. So a way that it's kind of a way that is not being used today in most organizations. In big organizations, it's still being used, but in small organizations, it's not being used anymore. But you kind of need to know what the pain is to understand what the value is of a new way of doing things. So today's lecture, I'm going to essentially give you 3 lectures within the time of 2 lectures, and the first one here is by far the most boring of them. This is kind of stuffy material. It's a little bit loose stuff, and you're not going to particularly like it, but I will try to entertain you. So. First, I will tell you a little bit about myself so that you know why I'm here. Then we'll talk about what is a project, what is project management, what is the project life cycle, and we're going to do a couple of mock case studies, and then we're going to talk about why is it so hard. Why is project management so hard? Because it's a disaster. Our whole industry is in an unfortunate predicament, really, or have been for many, many years. It's getting better and better. And then we're going to move into kind of modern ways of managing projects, and then the rest of the lectures are going to be about these modern ways of doing it, which will kind of give you the necessary information so you can actually participate in these projects. So, who am I? So I have a PhD in computer science in algorithms and data structures, so I'm a theoretician by training. More of a mathematician. Yes? Oh, thank you. So I'm really more, by training, more a mathematician than a computer scientist. But then I left academia after doing my PhD and moved to New York. And it was, as often is the case, it was love that brought me there, right? It was not a job that brought me there, it was love that brought me there. And so I didn't really have a choice. I felt I didn't have a choice but to move to New York for the sake of love. And I ended up spending, I was a professor there for a couple of years, and then I ended up spending 14 years in the internet industry in New York City. Started a couple of companies, was the chief technology officer for a couple of startups. Eventually ended up at a company called DoubleClick. Does anybody know what DoubleClick is? Anybody heard of DoubleClick? No? DoubleClick is the premier kind of technology for delivering display ads, right? So it's kind of nasty. I was there for I don't know how many years, and then in 2007, there was this rumor that somebody was trying to acquire us. And we got to know that it was Google, it was Microsoft, and it was Yahoo that were trying to buy us. So they started bidding at $2.1 billion, and they ended up Google ended up buying us for $3.1 billion, right? And they were really mostly afraid of the other one getting us, right? So they did not want to risk that Microsoft bought DoubleClick, because then Microsoft would get ahead of Google in that space, in display advertising. And Google didn't really, despite Google being, from a technical point of view, way superior to what we were at DoubleClick, they didn't really understand the dealing with big customers. Google in the beginning was just the long tail, only small mom and pop shops. They did not know how to deal with Coca-Cola as an advertiser, for example, right? But we knew that. So they bought us for our know-how and our business know-how, right? So I ended up at Google. And I was there for a year and a half, and then I moved from Brooklyn to Växjö. Yeah, right? Scratch your head, you know? And I left a lot of money on the table, a lot of stock options at Google. But it was a lifestyle choice. And I had spent 16 years in New York City, and I was kind of tired of it. Or we were tired of New York. We also had a 4-year-old daughter at the time. And you know, our friends, kids, they started to have tutors, they started to get tested. Some of them went to therapy. And I was thinking, you know, this is not the life for a child, right? So I rather wanted my child to learn how to ski and skate than using a subway pass and get around New York City, right? I wanted someone to get a little bit more in touch with the elements, with Mother Earth. Because at the end of the day, that's where we come from, and that's where we're going back to, right? So in a big city, you spend a lot of time really sheltering yourself from Mother Earth, right? You don't want Mother Earth, the elements, to have any impact on your business, right? If it's cold outside, you put the heat on inside. If it's hot outside, you put the air conditioning outside. In a big city, it barely matters what the weather is like, because you just take a few steps into the subway and pop up at the other side of the city, and then you walk into your office, and very artificial life somehow, right? So I wanted to get away from that. Right? So I moved to Sweden. I also wanted my daughter to have a Swedish upbringing. I actually wanted, there's values in this society that I appreciate, and I grew up here. So that's why we moved, right? And then, actually before we moved, at DoubleClick, I was responsible for implementation of agile project management. So this is what we're going to talk about in this course and what you're going to use in this course for about an organization like 300 technical workers, right? Engineers and architects, etc. So then I moved to Sweden, went back to academia, and after a few years here, you know, it started to itch. Right? It just felt too dusty somehow. You know, nothing was happening, and also it switched from from New York to Växjö, you know, everything is just so much slower, right? And I couldn't take it, right? I need to do something. So I left academia again, and became an entrepreneur here, started a company, which crashed, which is fine, right? It's really how you learn. It's okay. So I came back to academia, and then last year I moved to California. So I actually live in Silicon Valley right now. But I wasn't allowed to resign, right? I said, you know, I'm going to move to Silicon Valley, and so I need to resign. And they said, nah, you know, do you really have to resign? I mean, you could, you know, you could be part-time employed and come here every now and then and give some lectures and advise students and so on. So I said, okay, you know, I can do that. So now I'm flying back and forth. So every like 3 months or so, I come here and do something here. But the rest of the time I spend in Silicon Valley, doing quite a bit of work remotely for the department here, but also kind of exploring things over there. Right? I mean, if you want to do something, that's the place to be, right? In this space, because it's just, and the atmosphere is absolutely entrepreneurial atmosphere. It's just mind blowing, right? It's everybody is trying to change the world, right? They're not trying to do some little thing. They are, you know, swinging for the fence all the time. Fail most of the time, but it doesn't matter. The atmosphere that creates, that everybody is trying to change the world, it's a lovely atmosphere to be in. And on top of that, there's all that money around to fund these kind of blue sky efforts, right? So it's wonderful. So that's me. So I kind of wanted to just give you some background and also tell you that I've actually done this. What we're talking about here today, I've actually done it. I didn't read about it. I didn't study it. I did it. Right? So maybe that's the reason for you to pay attention. You know? And most professors here, they really haven't been out in industry at all, right? And so that's probably why they wanted to keep me, so that kind of have that part of the experience as well. So now on to some boring stuff, and please just try to pay a little bit of attention. I will upload all the slides, you'll get them. So what is a project? It's a temporary endeavor, right, to accomplish something, right? So it has goals, requirements and scope. It has a time frame. The project has a time frame. That's one big difference from the regular stuff that you do in the organization, in the company. Project has a start time and an end time. The end time might not always be met, but it does have an end time. Right? It has resources. Somebody's owning the project. It has a budget, and there's some executives up there who's in the organization who's sponsoring this project. He's kind of giving you the thumbs up. Yes, you can do this. Project management is about how do you go about to achieve the project goals while adhering to the constraints of the project, right? So it's about establishment of clear and achievable goals. It's about planning, organizing, securing, managing resources, balancing demands, communicating about the project. The biggest challenge, by far the biggest challenge in a project is human beings. It's almost never technology. It's human beings, because we have emotions and shit. You know, we're unpredictable. We get sick. You know, we start to fight with our peers, and you know, these things make it really, really difficult to run a project. And changing and incomplete requirements, because we'll kind of see later, it's impossible to start a project with complete requirements. You just don't know. You might think you know, but you don't know. So where does a project come from? Like, how is it kind of conceived? This is a kind of a typical organization. You have a CEO, you have sales organization, marketing, finance, product management, and then you have the engineering or technology department. And typically, most of the time, the project management office is part of the engineering. It could belong elsewhere as well. So who's starting a project? Typically, it's product management, right? Product management is responsible for keeping their ears to the ground, right? Understanding what the customers need, understanding what the market needs, understanding what their competitors are doing. So they are the ones who are responsible for knowing what to do. Right? And sometimes they're also internal projects, right? It might be that the finance department sees that, you know, we're bleeding money in some part of the organization, so they might realize that, you know, if we build this subsystem, maybe we can save some resources. So the initiation of the project might come from internally, but most of the times it comes externally or indirectly via product management. Just stop me if there's any question. So this is a traditional project life cycle. Project is initiated, you're planning the project, you execute the project, and you complete the project. So we're going to go through each of these phases in excruciating detail, and then I will give you some example of the specific projects. So, initiation. Then the question is asked why? Why are we doing this? What is the business value of what you're doing? If there is no business value, chances are you're not going to be allowed. Nobody's going to give you the go-ahead to do this project, because projects cost money, they cost resources. The opportunity cost. If we're doing this, there's something else we cannot be doing, right? So there has to have a business value. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. You're confirming who is sponsoring this, who's paying for this project in the organization, from whose resources does the money come. You confirm what is being done, what are the assumptions here, and what are we going to do. We engage stakeholders and everybody who has anything to do with the project. So it's the executives of the company, it's end users, it's customers, it's suppliers, it's everybody who would be touched by this project at all. You draft some high-level plan, and you figure out who needs to provide services for this, because it might be that we need consulting services, for example, in order to pull this off, because we don't have in-house the resources that we need, or the expertise, competencies that we need to do this. We can identify that early on. Then entering the planning phase. Told you it's boring. Getting a little bit more detailed, scope and requirements. Trying to figure out how we're going to do this. Maybe what technologies are we going to use? Who's going to do it? Preliminary staffing plan. When is it going to start and when is it going to end? How much money are we going to allow this to cost? What are the risks in this project? Risks could be kind of internal, in the sense that we might not be able to pull it off, or they could be external, that the marketplace competitive landscape changes. And draft some form of communication plan, because if somebody's paying for what you're doing, they want to know what's going on, right? They're not just going to give you the money and walk away and expect you to come back and deliver something. They're interested in what is happening in the project. You need to keep communicating. And then we execute. We run the project, and we'll get into how. You communicate, keep communicating. You monitor the progress, monitor risks, track if there's any changes, because it tends to be the case that requirements change all the time. Right? Could be simply because the market conditions change. Right? So we start the project, and then halfway through the project, something has changed in the competitive landscape. We cannot ignore that empirical data, but we need to take that into account, and I might modify the requirements of what we need to do. And we keep the plan up to date. And finally, we complete the project. So we have some form of review with the stakeholders. Develop a handover plan. So who's gonna maintain this? So we now built a new system, and we're rolling this out to our customers. And who's gonna maintain it if there's any problems with it? Typically, that's not the same people who build it, right? Maintenance is typically done by kind of less qualified people in the organization. You don't want the superstars to sit and do maintenance work. That's just poor use of the resources from a business perspective. And I'm thinking of talking about this mostly now from a business perspective. I'm not thinking about, even though most of it applies to it, kind of the public sector, right? But the goal here is typically the case, and especially where I live right now, is to make money, right? And then you have some form of retrospective at the end of the project. So how did it go? Is there anything we can learn? Is there anything we can do better next time? Or what went well? We learn from that too. And there's really, in the executing the project, there's another kind of life cycle. This is the software development life cycle. So you do some form of planning, you do analysis, you do design, and then implementation, and then, yeah, maintenance and support. You can skip that, I think. So here's an example of a project. So Sergey Brin, one of the founders of Google, he's getting a little bit frustrated with the fact that, you know, if he's trying to learn about something, he's searching, and so he gets a number of search results on Google. This is an old picture, as you can see, and then you kind of eye through the snippets of the results on the first page and look at them. You know, this one might be interesting, and that one doesn't seem that interesting, and this might be interesting. But he doesn't want to dive deep into each one of those that might seem interesting, but he wants to, I don't know what you guys do, I typically just open them up with separate tabs, right? Okay, and now I have 13 tabs, and now what? How do I, suppose I'm interested in actually learning about something like building a wooden sailboat, right? That's something that might go on for months, if not years. So I'm searching and collecting resources that I believe might have value to me at a later stage. Not right now. I don't need to know that particular detail about building a boat right now, but it's good to have that one kind of in my toolbox, right? So I want to save that somehow. And now I have them in tabs, right? And I kind of think of this as knowledge acquisition versus hit and run search. The assumption, if you think about it, in the search paradigm today, and this applies everywhere, the assumption is that you have a question, and then you engage in a session with a search engine, and then you find the answer, and then you're done, right? Well, that doesn't work for knowledge acquisition, right? I'm all collecting resources here, right? So what can I do? Well, I can save them as bookmarks, but you know, how do you feel about the bookmark management tools, right? I mean, they're awful, right? It doesn't really work that well. So he would like Sergey, you know, feeling this pain, he would like to be able to set aside the search result, not save them in tabs, but actually set them aside, save them somewhere else, in some space where he can have his resources. So, initiation. What is the business value? Well, users want this, and if we give them what they want, we make more money on ads. You know what? That's how they think. That's how Google thinks. So, give users what they want, because if we give them what they want, we're going to make more money. Right? So there is, yeah. So the first part of that is a little bit altruistic, right? But at the end of the day, it's the money that counts. Right? Executive sponsor, Sergey Brin. He's the one who wants this. So what are we going to do? What's the scope of this? Well, allow users to set aside search results to revisit at a later time. The stakeholders, well, it's Sergey and end users and the development team and usability team and search product managers and a whole slew of kind of functional areas in the organization. And what do we need? What resources do we need to do this? Well, we need obviously developers. We need some QA analysts, UI designers, usability folks, and translators, right? Because this needs to be rolled out in 37 languages from the get-go, whatever they have right now. So go one step deeper here, right? The planning phase now. So scope, we're going to put a button next to each search result. So if they click that one, they can save the search result. And there should be some form of CRUD functionality for the basket itself, right? So we should be able to see everything that we have put into the basket, and we should be able to delete stuff from that basket. Schedule is going to start on 25th of September, and we should be done by 1st of December. And some milestones. Well, after the first week, we should be able to have the buttons on the search results page. A couple of weeks later, we should have the basket functionality implemented. A couple of weeks after that, usability testing should be complete. A couple of weeks after that, translation should be complete. Another few days, integration testing, performance testing, and then the 1st of December, we're going to demonstrate this to the stakeholders. That's it. That's a high-level plan. How we're going to do it? Well, the UI engineering team will add the buttons, and a team from the Google Pay area is going to implement the basket functionality because they know that kind of stuff. Budget, 30 full-time employee months. This is what we allocate to this. Risks, well, the Google Pay team is currently working on something, and that might run late, and we have no idea who's going to do the translation work for us. And how are we going to communicate about this? Well, we're going to send weekly status reports to Sergey and the search product management team. Execution. So we do go through those phases, and then we have some form of tool. This is a Gantt chart from a Microsoft project, which, by the way, rumor has it that Microsoft project was implemented using agile methodologies, which is kind of ironic, right? And then completion, we demonstrate it, identify maintenance support, and we deploy the feature to end users. So, toy example. I'm going to have another toy example, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail here. So this is John's web agency. John started a web agency in downtown Växjö in the late 90s because, John likes money. And you can see, right? White teeth, really white teeth. I actually don't know who that is, but yeah, so he figured, this having a web agency would allow him to generate some revenue for himself, so he can buy another boat. And so he's running this small web agency, and there's kind of 3 departments. He's taking care of all the business stuff, John himself. And there's a couple of people in customer support, and I am consciously choosing genders here based on these stereotypes that we have in the industry. It's really unfortunate, and trying to do something about it, but it's hard. So customer support, typically women, right? Software development, typically men. UI design and testing, typically women. Database operations, always men, right? It's kind of the plumbers, heavy lifting kind of people. So, and John is always looking for new opportunities to make money, right? And when returning from lunch one day, he has a fabulous idea. there are 5 restaurants where he normally eats his lunch, right? Which one is these 5 here, right? And where he goes depends on what daily special they have, right? So he wants to find an easier way of figuring out where to go for lunch, right? And then he could check the restaurant's websites, the 5 different websites, but you know, you shouldn't have to go to 5 different places in order to do this, right? He would like to have access to this in one place in order to make an informed decision about what satisfies his taste buds that particular day, right? Well, I guess he could, you know, tear out the page from the local paper on Monday, where you have all the specials for the entire week. But you know, he doesn't want to carry that around, you know. So let's build a service that makes this possible. So we're going to go through those 4 steps with this project. So, scope and assumptions here. Restaurants can enter daily specials through some form of web UI. Customers can select which restaurants they're interested in. Every Monday morning, an email should be sent out telling the customer about the offerings of the restaurants that they have selected. Right? So there's one email that goes out, one email a week, and there you have all the resources you need in order to make an informed decision. Right? And John has already spoken to some restaurants and are very interested in this kind of service. Restaurants should have to authenticate, but customers should not have to authenticate. Those are assumptions. What's the business value of this? Well, we're going to charge restaurants a fee for including their offerings in the service, because this is a way for them to get new customers and repeat customers, right? But we also, in a way, creating a one-to-one marketing channel from restaurants to customers, right? And we don't really know right now, but this might be able to be leveraged in the future for other purposes. Who's sponsoring this? Well, John is the sponsor. And ongoing projects are almost finished, so most of the team is actually available to work on this. Engaged stakeholders? Well, John is as always, very engaged. And we need to identify individuals at the restaurants as well as some few customers to gain some insight as to what they actually want, the end users want. It's a high-level plan. We pitch it to the restaurants. We gather requirements from end users. We build web UIs for restaurants and customers, and we build some form of list management, the email execution engine to actually be able to send out these messages to the customers. Planning. So the scope, so for restaurants, we're going to have a web UI, authentication, and the restaurant should also be able to sign up a customer's email address by themselves. Right? So they have an email address. Somebody drops their business card at the restaurant in that that big bowl that sits there on the counter in the restaurant, and so the restaurant then has the right to sign them up. But I think they have the right. With GDPR, that's problematic. For customers, a web UI, they should be able to make updates and selections, which restaurants they're interested in, and they should be able to unsubscribe from the whole thing. Internally, we need to deal with the email sending and managing these lists of recipients for these emails. Open questions. How do we avoid authentication for customers? Can restaurants see who selected them? Don't know yet. Bounce and open race. You know what that is? Yeah. So I mean, restaurants want to know if it actually reached the customer. And they also want to know if the customer actually opened that email. As does John, right? Because we really want to know how this is working. How are we going to do this? Well, technology, these are PHP and MySQL are the technologies that we always used in this company, so we're going to continue to use those. That's where our expertise is. We can use existing hardware infrastructure. Well, these days it's probably all in the cloud. The web UI for restaurants, we're going to use SSL for security, simple authentication, some form of basic password policy functionality, and we have some database of offers. Right? And for customers, we have a database of selections and the ability to unsubscribe, and then we have the email stuff. And the email stuff here is not trivial, actually. I mean, it's trivial if you only send one email or two emails or a handful of emails, but if you're going to start to send a lot of emails to, for example, to users of, they might be using Gmail as their email service provider, it's in Google's interest not to create too much clutter in their customers' inboxes, right? They do not want their customers' inboxes to be full of spam, because at the end of the day, that means that chances are the customer is going to leave them, right? So Google is sitting there as a gatekeeper. So here comes 3,000 emails to Gmail customers. Google is going to say, wait a minute, you know, you're now spamming our users, right? You're not allowed to do that. So we might have to be whitelisted with Google in order for Google to let these emails in. Right? And you know, by the way, these days, previously, most of the decision that the gatekeeper is making used to be based on the content of the emails. Right? They were looking for inappropriate words. They were kind of trying to look for, determine, based on the content of the email, trying to determine, is this spam or not spam? Now, that's not really the case. To some extent, it's the case still, but mostly these days, they are determining that based on whether users open the email or not. Even if it looks like spam, if the user is opening the email, it's not spam to them. Right? So it kind of depends on whether you... So if you don't want those nasty emails, stop opening them. It's the best way to deal with it. Further in the planning, we are budgeting 11-person months. And staffing, well, you know, we have 1.5 developers available. Emma is available as a designer and tester. Tom has half of his time available. Malin has half of her time, and John is only 25% because, you know, he's busy chasing new projects. Right? And we're going to start October 1st, and we're going to end January 1st. That's the idea. Milestones. After a week, we should have requirements from end users. We should also have the database schema ready. A week later, UI design should be done. 2 weeks later, the restaurant UI should be functional. Another week, the customer UI should be functional. Another week, the email sending based on selection should be functional. Another couple of weeks, security aspects functional. Another week, functional testing complete. Another week, performance testing complete. Another week, we make it available to friends and family. And then on January 1st, we launch it to everybody. Right? This is just a bad plan in general, because you never launch anything at this time of the year, because people are not in the office, right? So if something goes wrong, you want people to be in the office. You don't do that over the holidays. It's like, you know, launching something and then walk away. You know, if it explodes, you need to be there and deal with it. Risks, so can we be viewed as spammers? Because you also don't want to end up in the bulk mail folder. And we still need a design for avoiding authentication for end users. So we draft this. So this is kind of the schedule. So we have names associated with everything. We have a date when it's supposed to start. We have a date when it's supposed to be finished. And then we start. A week into the project, John has been too busy. He hasn't been able to nail down all the requirements yet. Right? Tom kind of, you know, he knows. He kind of knows what, you know, this is typical of those kind of people, actually. He knows what it's going to be like anyway. And, you know, he might be right. Often he's right, so he just keeps doing it. Right? So the database schema is already done, essentially, leaving some wiggle room for if there's more information from John. Another week passes. Well, now design is behind because now John is done with his task, but since he was late with his task, Emma is late with the design. Right? So she's only she's only 70% done. She should have been done by now. Another 2 weeks later, design is still not complete here, but implementation is starting anyway. Right? We can start implementation even though design is not entirely done yet. Another 2 weeks, Vlad got sick. Right? Probably has kids. I mean, it's November, right? November, if you have kids, you're sick. Right? It's just the way it is, right? So he hasn't been able. So this is now 2 weeks after he should have been done with the unsubscription for Sanko. He's only halfway done with it, and he hasn't even been able to start working on the security for customers. This is 30th of November. 2 weeks later, Vlad is still behind. And guess what? Fred got sick, right? Chances are he picked it up from John, or from Vlad, right? So at this point, we realize we're not going to be able to launch on January 1st. We delay the launch by 2 weeks to January 15th. 7th of January, we realized there's some performance problems with the restaurant UI. So we cannot commit to launch on the 15th even, so we delay launch by another week, the 22nd. And so 15th of January, we demo the service to John. Handover plan, so Malin will be customer support. Vlad will be the main technical support. Tom will monitor resource usage. And also we forgot, you know, we need some internal reports to understand how the system is being used. So we are giving Tom the task of developing some of those reports. So it's completely internal reports. So the delay here costs 4 person months above budget. And so 4 person months versus 11, so that's like almost 40% above budget, right? And the scary thing is that that's freaking excellent, 40% above budget. That's just unbelievably good, right? That's a sad state of affairs. Lessons learned: don't rely on John only for requirements. Build in some buffer for people getting sick. Attack the riskiest tasks earlier in the project. And only 5 restaurants are participating. We need to secure more clients earlier on for future projects. So this might seem sad, but the state of affairs is way worse than that. These numbers come from a study from maybe 6-7 years ago or something in the US with I don't know, hundreds of companies, right? So the average IT project costs twice as much as budget, and it takes twice as long to do it, and it has 65% of the required functionality when you're done, right? I mean, as a group of professionals, I mean, we should be embarrassed, right? And you might think, well, you know, if this is the case on average, why don't we budget twice as much, allow it twice as long, and reduce scope a little bit, and we're going to hit the target next time, right? Well, it seems like a reasonable approach, but the thing is, if you do that, you're not going to be allowed to do the project. because there's somebody else undercutting you because they are promising they're going to deliver, right? So nobody's going to fund your project because your project looks really expensive. Their project looks cheap, so they're going to fund that project. And they're used to things failing, but they forget that. They live in the illusion that this is going to work, right? This has always been the case. We continue that way. So you can't do that, unfortunately. Right? So you cannot be honest by learning from empirical data, which is kind of sad. Now, in this study, they also asked, why do projects fail? And the top factor for failure was incomplete requirements. Right? Lack of end-user involvement in the process, lack of resources, lack of executive support. Because, you know, executives, they change their minds all the time. It's really windy up there, right? And I get idea, you know, and I meet a friend, I get some ideas. So I say, you know what, yeah, we should do this instead. So I cancel the project and do something else, right? So you need to have really secure the executive support for what you're doing. Requirements are changing after you started a project. Unrealistic schedule or poor communication. Now, some projects succeed. And it's from the same study. Factors for success, user involvement. We cannot guess. We do not know. It doesn't matter if we ourselves are users of the service or product that we're building. It's just one point of view. We do not know. Right? Especially, let me side note here. I saw an interesting TED talk recently about perception, and this from I think that's a neuroscientist from England, and he said that when we see something, what we see, the image that we create, see something. The image that we create in our brain is 10% based on what's coming in from the sensation from our eyes. 90% of it is made up. 90% of it is made up. Right? We are creating our own reality. We're making our shit up. Right? And so if you're making your shit up, I'm making my shit up, well, you know, so what I think should be done could be very different from what you think should be done. Right? An example of this is, you know, if I show you a two-dimensional picture of show you this. You probably see a three-dimensional cube there, right? Well, clearly there's no three-dimensional cube there. It's two dimensions. There is no three-dimensional cube there, but you see it. You make it up. We all make it up. Right? So we see that pattern, and we jump to the conclusion there's a three-dimensional cube there. Right? We're just making it all up, guys. Side note. Okay, so what is the problem? What is the problem? Why do we fail? Why do software projects fail? What is it? What's the inherent problem here? Right? Well, it is that it assumes a predictable world. It assumes that clear requirements are known from the beginning. It assumes that the competitive landscape does not change. So it assumes that when we start our project, the rest of the world grinds to a halt and waits to start again until we're done with our project. We know this is not true, right? And these days, the competitive landscape changes much quicker than it used to, right? There's a lot of it, especially in the IT business, a lot of it's service-based, so it's very easy these days to to launch new services. Your competitors are launching a lot of things while you're doing what you're doing, right? And that changes what you need to do. Because the purpose of it is to make money, and that means beating your competitors. It assumes that the stakeholders don't change their minds, which you already talked about. And it assumes that availability of resources doesn't change, right? So we assign this team to do this project, build this new product or service, and then we have our existing product or service, which is generating revenue, which is financing this new project. Now, if that stops, if the money stops coming in, we cannot continue to do our project. And so who's going to fix that? That's the most important thing to fix, right? Who's going to fix that? Well, you're going to put your best people to fix it, because it's the most important thing. So they're pulled out of the project that was running, right? So resources for the project changes. Now, let's take a break. So 15 minutes. done, designed before you start building it. And so we took, as computer scientists, we took that model of building things and applied it to software.
Yeah, it's not suitable.
No, no, it's not suitable. And that's what's kind of realization here. But it took a couple of decades before the software community realized that, you know, doing things the same way as manufacturing industry does it doesn't work here.
Yeah. So it's kind of like the assessment, like for during each period, then we do a project.
What do you mean?
Each period, we do an assessment for our project and with the environment, and we know what kinds of a risk, what kinds of the competition, what kinds of the environment change.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
know how
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's essentially what's going to come now. How do we do? What is a better way of doing it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It's time. We're live again. So just again, so this way of building something came from the manufacturing industry. That's how things were built in the manufacturing industry. And so the software industry took that model and said, okay, so if that's how you can build things, then of course that's how you can build software as well, right? And it's true. However, there are much better basic ways of doing it. And that's essentially what the rest of this lecture and tomorrow's lecture are going to be about. So, and this, by the way, I didn't even use that word, right? This is called the waterfall model, right? One thing it's done before the next thing starts. So an iterative methodology. So this is another way of building software. There, the motivation is that requirements do change. The world around us changes. And embrace that change. You cannot avoid it. As much as you want for it not to happen, it doesn't matter. It's happening anyway. Things are changing anyway. And as the Buddhists say, change is the only constant thing, right? It's the only thing you can rely on is change. So iterative methodologies assume that change will happen. Traditional methodologies, like this waterfall, traditional one, when changes happen there, you're trying to minimize the impact that change has on your project, right? So here you're assuming that it's not going to change, and if it changes, if as my friend says, if poop hits the spinner, you're trying to minimize that impact of that change. So in iterative methodologies, you do some planning, and also in design, implementation, testing, and then you evaluate it. See, was what we built here, was that good? If not, we're continuing, right? Continuing to do it until we're ready. So as an example, so Leonardo has been asked to paint Mona Lisa, and he makes a sketch, right? So somebody's commissioned him to paint Mona Lisa. He makes a sketch, and he asks the customer, so will this work? And the customer says, no, she must be turned left. Well, it's a good thing you didn't finish it, isn't it? Right? Because it would have been wasted work, right? He would have to start from the beginning again. So he didn't waste that work. So he has another go at it. And so he makes a change, make her turn the other way. And he says, how about this? Well, the head is too big, says the customer. Well, again, it's a good thing he didn't finish it. So he makes the change. This is better. Well, I prefer bigger eyes, but for the price I pay, it's okay, right? So you make kind of a stake at it, right? So it's his proposal, not investing too much effort into doing that, and check with the customers. Am I on the right way here? Is this what you want? And now since you haven't invested too much, you're kind of open to new ideas, right? Changed requirements, right? So that's iterative methodologies. You iterate until you get it right. Incremental methodologies Here also the motivation is that requirements do change, but furthermore that partial functionality is available. Think about it, you know, say that you had the crazy idea of creating a new word processor, right? Well, we know that kind of the amount of functionality that you have in Microsoft Word, for example, is enormous amount of functionality, but there might be 10% of the functionality that you use 90% of the time, right? So if you build that 10% of functionality first, you can launch that. And so most people would be satisfied with that. It would be enough for them. And so assuming that they will be willing to pay for this, you can start to generate revenue, even though you've only done 10% of the work so far, but 10% of the work corresponds to 90% of the customer's needs. So why build everything before you make it available to them? So build what they need the most and make that available to them, and then you can continue to build things, the additional functionality, while being able to finance that through the revenues that you get from the partial functionality that you rolled out. And so again, embrace the change. So you break up a project into smaller chunks, where each chunk has business value on its own, and you deal with one chunk at a time. So a depiction of this. So here you have 12 chunks of functionality. Each column here is a chunk of functionality, and this is simplistic, but so there's a UI piece to it, there's some middleware piece to it, there's a back-end piece to each piece of functionality. And so you start by building one piece of functionality here. While you do this, you might add a UI for some other pieces of functionality while you add it. Yes, question?
It's the equivalent of like alpha and beta stage of the software. When you release like let's say you make a software and then you release an alpha stage.
It would be kind of like alpha, yes. Not beta though. No. I mean, beta is functionally complete, right? But yes, yes. So here you have, so after working on it for a while, you have some complete functionality, and then you have some incomplete functionality, and you have some that you haven't even started yet. And you continue, and now most of the functionality is complete, and there's some stuff you haven't not yet started, and eventually you finish it all, right? So here, so at this stage, you might be able to roll out all of this to your customers, and they will get this functionality later on. But if you have made a wise choice and picked the functionality that's the most important to them, the customers most of your customers will be happy already, even without this functionality. And then eventually you're done. So, Agile. Agile is incremental plus iterative. So you take a chunk of functionality, you iterate until you get that right. Then you take the next chunk of functionality, you iterate until you get that right. Traditionally, what is being done is rather that, kind of in this picture, traditionally what is done is that you first build this base here, upon which everything rests, and then you build the next layer, and then you build a layer on top of that. In incremental, and so also in Agile, you build a complete stack for one piece of functionality at a time instead. And if you do it this way, the visibility into the project, what's going on, is very high the entire time. Because you pick one piece of functionality and you show it, right? So all the stakeholders, they know what's going on. They see what is going on here. If you start by building the back end for everything, the stakeholders see nothing at all. It's just an abstract back end that's not doing anything at all, right? So on a regular basis, they get to inspect what's being done, right? So that's visibility. Adaptability, well, since you're building one chunk at a time, the other chunks can be changed, right? What is in the other chunks can be changed. We're building one chunk here, right? So you can adapt to changes in requirements, changes in the marketplace, etc. You can generate business value, since you're taking one chunk at a time, much earlier on. Traditionally, there's no business value at all until everything is done. Mm. And depending on, assuming that you actually attack the riskiest, some of the riskiest tasks first, risk goes down much faster than in traditional methodologies. So, the Agile Manifesto. So this came, I think I'll get to that later. So the sad state of affairs was recognized by the community in, I think in the early 90s, right? The kind of software development had a bad rep because we didn't deliver, kept failing to deliver. Projects kept failing. So there was this group of 20 or so kind of reputable computer scientists who got together and kind of took it upon themselves that we need to save this somehow. We need to fix this somehow. So what are we going to do? So they locked themselves up in some cabin in Snowbird, Utah, in 2001, I think it was. And the result of that meeting was the Agile Manifesto. So very high level, pretty abstract still. And it says that we value, it doesn't mean that only one and not the other, but we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We value working software over comprehensive documentation. Documentation of something that will never reach the customer is useless, right? Traditionally, documentation has had a value, right? Somebody's going to produce the documentation for this new system that we're building, and so they spend time doing that. Well, if the system doesn't get built, right? If the building of the system fails, that effort that has been put in towards producing the documentation with the system, completely wasted. But there was always the case that the person who did that got a check mark next to their name, did their job, right? So that guy is okay who did it, but from an organizational point of view, had no value at all, right? So those resources were wasted, completely wasted. Could have been invested somewhere else. We value customer collaboration over contract negotiation. We value responding to change over following a plan. And that's the end of this part. So we talked about what a project is, what project management is, the traditional project lifecycle. We looked at John's business, and then we just briefly looked at iterative, incremental methods, and then Agile, which is a combination of those two. And next, we're going to talk about Scrum. So Scrum is one Agile methodology, which you are going to use in this project. We're going to talk about how do you do planning, user stories. Yeah, we'll get to these things in 2 minutes. So managing with Scrum. Just give you an idea of a real-world project that I was involved in. Talk a little bit about where is Agile today? What are people doing? Right? What are different organizations doing? And then dive into Scrum, where there's different roles for people. There are ceremonies, meaning meetings, and there's some artifacts, meaning digital artifacts being produced, like requirements and so on. So something that is the opposite of dear to me. internet display advertising. So, you know, these are display ads, right? And the way it works, right? So you're a user, in your browser, you request a page, you get some HTML back to your browser. The browser is parsing this HTML. It might find some references to resources, might be images or whatever, that reside on other servers than this publisher's web server. And some of them might be references to advertisements, that these display ads that show up on this page. Now, typically these advertisements do not come from the publisher, right? Somebody else is delivering the advertisement, right? For example, Google. So the browser, when it sees a reference to an advertisement, it goes and requests what advertisement this is from a network ad server, to Google, for example, then, right? And this network ad server sends the image back to the browser, and the browser is then able to render this image so you can actually see it, right? On this side here, the publisher might have, say that this publisher is New York Times. Well, you know, the New York Times has different sections, right? Like every newspaper has different sections. You might have a finance section, a sports section, and a lifestyle section, a culture section, etc. And the publisher realizes that you know, I can charge more for the ads in the finance section, right? Because whenever I show an ad as a publisher, I get paid, right, by the advertiser via the network ad server, right? So I want to kind of slice up what I have available for ad space in different sections, because I can get more for in some sections than I can get in other sections. So in the finance section, I am focusing on selling ad space to maybe investment banks or whatever it is, right? And they're willing to pay more to show an ad to get their ad in front of a user than an advertiser in the parenting section, right? So the publisher is kind of slicing up their what they call the inventory here, and the advertiser is then looking at what inventory is available. Where do I want my ads to run? Where do I want my ads to be shown, right? So here's a simple ad campaign. So I'm an advertiser. I want to show 10 million ad impressions in May of 2018. I should change that to 19, shouldn't I? And I also want some targeting. I just don't want you to show the ad to anybody, but I only want to target users in Scandinavia, right? Because that's where my business is. The advertiser's business is in Scandinavia, so there's no point for me to show ads in Germany. Right? I want to show them between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. for some reason, because it feels like that's the time when the people who are interested in my message, my ads, are most likely to show up. I want to show them in the financial section of the site because it's related to finance. As an advertiser, I'm in the finance business. And I want to show green ads to Swedes and blue to Danes for some reason. Right? And I also don't want to show the same ad more than twice to any user. Right? Because I'm really interested in reaching more users rather than flooding some individual users with a lot of ads. And furthermore, I would like to maximize the click-through rate. You know, I want users to click on these ads. Sometimes it doesn't matter if people click on the ads or not. It's just simply pure branding, right? You just want to broadcast a message. But here, what I want to do, I actually want them to click on the ad and click through to my site so I can engage with them on my site. Now, this is kind of how the system works. The technical, the ad server, the network ad server works. So we have ad servers. Those are the ones you saw on the previous page. Those are the ones who actually take a request and return an ad to the user's browser, right? And which ad they're going to show, well, it depends on where does the user come from. If you take this previous ad campaign that we were talking about, does the user come from Scandinavia? Well, if the user doesn't come from Scandinavia, those ads for that particular campaign is of no interest. I cannot return those ads to the user. But if the user comes from Scandinavia, I can return that ad to that particular user, unless I've shown it twice already, right? So this is kind of how the system works. So in April of 2012, this system served 45 billion ads per day. I would imagine that that number now is way above 100 billion ads a day. The volume, the data volume we're talking about here leaves everything else in the dust, right? There's nothing else there's no other systems out there that's processing as much as this. Nothing comes even close, right? Now, here's an idea. So I told you before that ads in the finance section. Is that moving? I never noticed that. Ads in the finance section can be priced higher than in other sections, right? So, okay, so here's an idea. We can probably charge a higher price for ads in other sections if we know that the user is somebody who sometimes visits the finance section, because that means that they're interested in finance stuff, but so we can catch them somewhere else, right? So here's an idea for a project. We offer an advertiser the option to target an audience, such as the finance section readers, regardless of whether they are in the finance section right now, but they are kind of tagged as a finance section reader. Doesn't sound too difficult to pull off. Right? You start to look at this, and you realize that every single subsystem here needs modification. In addition to this, we have system maintenance going on. We have more than 10 concurrent projects going on here with new functionality and stuff. We have engineering teams that are specialists on one part of the system. They don't understand the entire system. We have over 300 engineers, and it's busy to get this out to the market. An extremely complex problem. Right? Just to give you a flavor of what it's like out there. Okay, let's get back to this now. So again, issues with the waterfall model was that there were no clear requirements at the start. Or it assumes that we have all requirements. It assumes that the world grinds to a halt. It assumes that stakeholders don't change their minds. It assumes that resource availability doesn't change. And on top of this, the people doing the work, the developers, they hate changing requirements. If there's one thing that a developer dislikes, it's changing requirements. They just want to be asked what to do and then close the door to the office and do that. Not to be interrupted all the time. Oh, could you also change this? Can we change the color of that? Can we add a list box there? Can't stand it. Because they're control freaks, right? I mean, it's them and the computer, right? Them and the computer. And the computer tells you when you do something wrong, right? And you know, the computer is reliable, a reliable friend, right? You stay in control, right? When other people come in, you know, you lose control, right? And we all want control. On that topic, side note here again. So you know that if you were to compress Earth to maximum density, so essentially a black hole, right? You know how big it gets. So it means you eliminate the distances between all the particles, right? You pack all the particles on Earth, eliminate the distances between them, just pack them. You end up with something the size of a pea, right? Okay, we have about the same density as Earth ourselves, right? So if you were to compress yourself into maximum density, it would be a tiny little p, right? And what does that tell you? It tells you that there's nothing here. It's just space. It's just void. It's small, small particles with the distance between particles relative to the size of the particles are, I think I read somewhere that if one particle is like an apple, the particle closest to it is about 2 kilometers away. Gives you some idea of, that's just empty space. It's just void. Or dark matter, or whatever it is, right? So what we are is sparse structures or particles filled with a void. That's all we are, right? And on top of that, every single particle as part of you is going to be replaced at least every 7 years. So there's not a single particle in your body that was there 7 years ago. Not a single one, right? So they get replaced, and most of them get replaced way more often than that, right? So what you are is a loose, sparse structure of particles where the particles are being replaced all the time. And on top of that, this loose, sparse structure of particles is held to the Earth thanks to gravity, right? And the Earth is spinning around at a few thousand kilometers an hour, and the Earth is spinning around the Sun at even higher speed, and the galaxy is shooting through space at an even higher speed. And here we are trying to stay in control, right? It's just futile. It's just not willing to let go of that assumption that we are in control of things, right? If you add to that all the shit we're making up when we look at the world, right? It's anyway. Side note. Can't help myself. I have a captive audience, you know. Why not? So, agile. So, agile software development. So it's this loop, right? We plan and do and learn from this, test it, and then based on the data we get back from the test, we adjust, and then we do it again and continue. Okay? Now, so it relies on empirical data. You know, we're learning, we're getting empirical data, right? And in order for this to work, we need pretty short feedback loops so that we actually get as much empirical feedback data as we can, right? And we get that through continuous deployment, right? So the stuff that you're building is continuously rolled out to your customers, so you get customer feedback as much as possible, as fast as possible. In the software development process itself, we have continuous integration, meaning test automation and continuous builds, right? So that gives us quality feedback on our product. So first we get customer feedback quickly, we get quality feedback quickly, and in order to be able to react to this and change what we're building, we need continuous refactoring. You know what refactoring is? Like fixing our code, updating our code all the time, right? In order for the code to be nimble, so that we need to be nimble. Agile today. So this is 2016. So 94% of I don't know how they selected the respondents here, but are now using Agile rather than the waterfall model of building things. When asked how does it benefit them, they said 88% say the main benefit is the ability to change priorities, to change requirements. Visibility, team productivity, speed to market, team morale, and we'll get to that, why that is. Among the agile methodologies, Scrum is the hands-down leader right now. There are other ones, kind of especially a few hybrids. Yeah, essentially everything here is almost Scrum-based, right? And then there's some other things, Kanban. And then there's a Spotify model, which is Scrum-like, I think, still. What techniques do they use? They use something called iteration planning. These are essentially when you do take one chunk, it's one iteration. They have daily meetings, daily stand-up meetings, and we'll get to those as well. They have retrospectives after each iteration, after doing each chunk. And they have reviews. They're showing what they have done. When the team has done something, they show it to the stakeholder. Is this, remember the Mona Lisa? Is this what you want? And the stakeholder might say, no, you need to modify it a little bit. Okay, then we have another iteration. We'll do the modification, then we show it again. Right? And there's short iterations. Success of Agile project, 98% feel that they realize success. So Agile is really a disruptive social technology, I would argue. It changes how any organization pursues anything, right? It's about, you have a group of people and you want to accomplish something, a software project with this, or you want to accomplish something with a group of people. How do you do that? Right? How do you organize yourself to accomplish something? You need some form of organization, some form of processes in order to get anything done at all, right? And traditionally then, they said that, well, you know, first we have to plan it and we have to figure out everything beforehand and then we start the project, etc., etc. And Agile says that, no, there's another way of doing this. And we will get into exactly how it can be done. So it sounds great, right? So let's just do it. The problem is it's not easy. It's, on paper, it's trivial. But when it comes down to actually implementing it, to do it, it turns out to be pretty hairy, right? Because it's a completely new way of working for everyone. And we'll get to kind of, you'll understand this. Senior level authority is muted. So the executives no longer have as much say as they used to have. A lot of decision making is pushed down to those who actually do the job rather than those who are sitting at the top, right? And they are used to being able to tell the organization what they should be doing. They can no longer do that in this model. So of course they're going to fight against it, because at the end of the day, your position, your status, or your position in your profession has a big impact in your status in society. How you feel about yourself, you know. Oh, you know, he's a CEO, or that's part of your identity, becomes important for you. So nobody wants to give that up, right? Because that's more dear to you than the success of your organization, right? You're still looking out for number one first, right? So there's a resistance in this. There's also resistance among software developers, because it's now they will have to do things in a very different way from what they had done before. So they lose a sense of control, right? Which is dear to us. Yeah. So why is it hard? Organizational culture is at odds with the values of Agile. So this is about culture and people. There's a difficulty. The difficulty, if you look down this list, I don't know if there's any technology here. General resistance in the organization, inadequate management support, lack of skills related to the methodology itself, inconsistency, availability of customers. Because, you know, if you want end users, if it's important to have end users' input, you need to get hold of end users. And it's not always easy to get hold of end users. So none of the problems are technical. And to exemplify some of these, in most organizations, these hierarchical organizations, people are used to micromanaging, right? You're used to telling the people who are reporting into you, you're used to telling them what they're supposed to do, right? In Agile, you can no longer do that, and we'll get to that. Typically, you have individual reward systems, right? People are paid, you're compensating people based on how they individually, how you perceive that they individually contribute to the workplace, right? Now, it's about the team instead, because you're divided into teams. People are divided into teams. Transparency. You have visibility into what's going on. And especially executives, they don't want anybody to see what they're doing, because truth to be told, they don't do too much. Actually, at least it doesn't look as if they do too much, because it's mostly talking and thinking. So they don't have a whole lot to show for what they're doing, so they don't want anybody to look into what they're doing. It's kind of the emperor's new clothes kind of thingy, right? And this is depicting standing and falling with a team. Typically, you're not used to that in an organization. You're typically on your own. Now you're relying on a team. This team stands and falls with you. Some organizations think that, we're different, right? This agile thing is not going to work here because we're different, right? Because we've done things a certain way for throughout history, and it's worked for us, and now you're telling me we should do things completely differently. Wow, it's scary, right? I'm not sure that we will be able to do what we need to do if you're telling me we're going to do it in a completely different way. So sometimes what they do is they take Agile, they look at Agile, what Agile is proposing, and they cherry pick some parts of Agile. So they have their existing way of doing things, and they say, oh, here's some good ideas, so let's incorporate those into our existing processes. But that's kind of like reading a recipe for lasagna and saying that, I don't think so. That's not how I've done it in the past, so I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it the way I normally do it, but maybe take some ideas from this recipe, right? But my point here is that, well, how about making the lasagna according to the recipe first, right? Now, if it doesn't taste good, you can modify it. But so instead of starting from where you are and take some ideas and incorporate them, you jump to the other side, and if this doesn't work, you might start to move towards where you were a little bit. Right? Fear-based, completely fear-based. This is depicting you've probably seen this at some point, that the absence of end-user input to the process, that you really don't fully understand what it is the customer needs. Right? Lacking definition of done, we can skip that one. Since we're now doing one chunk at a time, the end destination is no longer clear. Right? We only know the direction, but we don't know exactly where we will end up. And sometimes that's scary for people, because if you don't know where you're going, you don't feel comfortable taking a step in any direction at all. And you might have a product manager responsible for the product who's too busy to prioritize, right? If you're going to build one chunk at a time, you better make sure that you build the most important chunk from your customer's perspective. And if the product owner is not fully engaged with the customers, he or she is not going to know what is the most important, and so you might not build what is the most important. Right? So you need engaged product owners or product managers. So Scrum in 100 words. You know what? Let's break here, because it is 11:59, and continue with this tomorrow. So I think you'll see you again at 3 o'clock tomorrow or something, right? Yeah. What?
1 o'clock, I think.
3. It's 3 here, yeah. Okay, so thank you.